June 4, 1943, Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia. Unofficered German soldier Hermann Butcher gripped the gangway railing as he stepped onto American soil, his legs still shaky from 2 weeks at sea crossing the Atlantic. Through the lingering morning mist, he observed a scene that directly contradicted years of Nazi propaganda. Black and white American laborers working side by side, operating machinery that seemed decades ahead of anything in Europe. Women handled cranes with ease, dressed in practical coveralls, while children sold newspapers at the perimeter gates. Not a single worker appeared intimidated by the presence of enemy soldiers. "Heads will spin back home," Butcher murmured to the man behind him. "These Americans are insane." Butcher would later recount this arrival in his memoir, penned during internment and published in Germany in 1952. His account remains one of the most thorough records by a German soldier of life in the United States. The Norfolk Naval Base extended over 4,300 acres, its docks stretching far beyond the eye's reach. Cranes rose like metallic giants, loading and unloading multiple vessels simultaneously. In a single morning, this port processed cargo volumes that would surpass Hamburg's typical weekly throughput. Yet it was not the scale that surprised the incoming prisoners, it was the everyday normality. Civilians strolled freely near military installations. Street vendors sold coffee and pastries mere yards from warships. A brass band performed contemporary hits at a war bond rally nearby. Among the arrivals were 2,500 veterans of the Africa Corps, the first major group in what would ultimately number 425,000 German POWs held in the United States by the end of the war. In the months ahead, these soldiers would see more than just American material abundance. They would encounter a phenomenon far harder to reconcile with their military indoctrination. A nation at war that appeared indifferent to the conventions of war itself. A society confident in its power treated captured enemies with unexpected courtesy, displaying behaviors so alien to German military expectations that they undermined Nazi ideology more effectively than any battlefield defeat could. The processing procedures at Norfolk began with what Butcher later called the first impossibility. According to German military doctrine, from Poland to France to North Africa, captured soldiers were either valuable assets to exploit or liabilities to be managed minimally. International law, including the Geneva Convention, was invoked selectively. Here, American officers read the Geneva Convention aloud in German, patiently explaining rights and inquiring about individual needs. Red Cross records from June 1943 noted that Jewish American personnel, including sergeants with recognizably Jewish names, distributed care packages while explaining the availability of kosher meals. Some German soldiers initially laughed nervously, suspecting mockery, but it was genuine. The American military had anticipated religious dietary requirements for enemy soldiers. Medical care was equally extraordinary. German prisoners with wounds were treated with penicillin, a drug scarcely available to German field hospitals. Swiss Red Cross inspector Guy Matreau recorded in July 1943 that the medical attention given to German POWs equaled or exceeded that provided to U.S. service members, leaving prisoners incredulous. African-American medical personnel served in integrated teams at Norfolk, a practice forbidden in Germany, handling tasks like drawing blood from Wehrmacht officers for routine checkups without incident. Perhaps the most startling moment occurred at mealtime. Prisoners were escorted into mess halls where American sailors were already eating. The two groups, enemies who had fought to the death in convoy battles, dined under the same roof. Americans and Germans used the same serving lines, sampled equivalent meals, and the Americans showed little interest in the foreigners, focusing instead on a baseball game playing over the radio. The cognitive dissidence continued on the 3-day train journey to interior camps. Unlike the secretive, often clandestine transport of POWs in Germany, American authorities made no effort to conceal the movement of prisoners. The Germans could see the openness of the operation, the routine nature of their treatment, and the extraordinary integration of soldiers and civilians alike, further challenging everything they had been taught about enemies and war conduct. During the Second World War, passenger trains, not freight cars, but full-sized coaches with cushioned seating, regularly transported German prisoners of war through American cities, providing an unusual and highly visible glimpse into wartime logistics. At Washington, D.C.'s Union Station, on documented occasions in June 1943, German captives observed everyday Americans seeing off soldiers bound for training camps. Families embraced openly, wives kissed husbands, children waved miniature flags, and teenagers lingered over milkshakes at the station cafe. The prisoners were confined to the trains, separated only by windows and guards whose primary concern appeared to be coordinating platform traffic rather than monitoring the captives. As the trains rolled past industrial zones, the usual wartime secrecy was strikingly absent. Factories bore large signage displaying company names, and workers' vehicles filled parking lots within view. At the Glenn L. Martin Aircraft Plant in Baltimore, German prisoners could easily see rows of B-26 bombers ready for deployment. There was no effort to obscure production or disguise military assets. Industry continued openly, operating in full sight of enemy eyes. Further north in Pennsylvania, trains passed active coal mines and steel mills, their furnaces burning continuously through the night. Residential neighborhoods of single-family homes, complete with gardens, extended around each industrial complex, while streetlights and radio antennas marked the landscape with civilian normalcy. Records from a Harrisburg, Pennsylvania stop indicate German officers witnessing the rhythm of American labor. Men exited factories carrying lunchboxes, dressed in civilian shoes and wristwatches, and drove their own cars home. According to memoirs by contemporaries such as Butcher, one officer noted with surprise how casually a worker discarded a partially eaten apple to reach into his lunchbox for a fresh one, an observation highlighting the stark contrast between the abundance in the U.S. and the deprivation German soldiers had endured. Meanwhile, Camp Hearn in Texas opened in December 1942 on 720 acres near Robertson County. Military documents detail its capacity for nearly 4,800 German prisoners and describe accommodations surpassing what many had experienced as civilians. The camp's construction, recorded extensively in Army Corps of Engineers reports and War Department files, included wooden barracks equipped with electric lighting, indoor plumbing with flush toilets, and hot water heaters in every building. Prisoners were provided individual beds with proper mattresses, sheets, and blankets, and recreational facilities featured ping-pong tables, musical instruments, and art libraries. In an August 1943 report, Swiss inspector Emil Sandstrom remarked that Camp Hearn not only met the Geneva Convention standards but exceeded the living conditions familiar to many prisoners in Germany. The camp's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Cecile Stiles, who had studied German prior to the war, addressed the captives in their own language. He explained the camp regulations, but also offered an unprecedented degree of autonomy. Prisoners were permitted to elect representatives, organize recreational activities, and manage day-to-day schedules within the framework of military requirements. This level of self-governance was unusual and at first bewildering to men accustomed to rigid hierarchies or harsh captivity. Medical care at Camp Hearn was exceptional. The facility, inspected monthly by the International Red Cross, included equipment often unavailable in German civilian hospitals, X-ray machines, surgical suites, dental chairs, and a full pharmacy stocked with penicillin. In one documented case, prisoner Georg Gartner, later noted as the last German POW to surrender in 1985, received prompt surgical treatment for appendectomy in September 1943, performed by an American Army surgeon with the support of German medical staff. Daily life also included amenities designed to maintain morale. Camp Hearn operated a canteen where prisoners could spend earnings from voluntary labor to buy items like cigarettes, chocolate, soap, stationery, musical instruments, and art supplies. War Department records indicate that these allowances were intended to reduce unrest and minimize escape attempts, reflecting a philosophy that even enemy prisoners could benefit from modest comforts without compromising security. The ability to shop and select personal items rather than merely surviving under strict subsistence was a concept that challenged both German preconceptions and conventional military thinking. By the fall of 1943, Texas faced a critical shortage of labor, prompting widespread reliance on prisoner workers. The War Manpower Commission, working in coordination with the Provost Marshal General's office, approved the use of German prisoners of war in agricultural settings and other civilian industries unrelated to military production. Prisoners received compensation of 80 cents per day, paid in canteen scrip, equivalent to the standard daily wage for an American private. Extensive administrative files documenting these labor programs are preserved in National Archives Record Group 389. At the expansive King Ranch near Kingsville, Texas, German POWs encountered American agriculture on an unprecedented scale that contrasted sharply with European norms. The ranch encompassed 825,000 acres, exceeding the size of the entire state of Rhode Island. Surviving ranch records from 1943 to 1945 show that German prisoners labored alongside Mexican-American vaqueros and African-American ranch hands in cattle operations. While social interaction between these groups was limited, the practical cooperation challenged Nazi concepts of racial hierarchy. Prisoners frequently remarked in letters subject to military censorship on the advanced mechanization they observed. A single combine harvester could replace dozens of workers, trucks transported crops instead of horse-drawn wagons, and small civilian airplanes were occasionally deployed to locate cattle and identify strays. Ranch foreman Richard Clyburg Jr., according to employment records, treated German POWs as temporary employees rather than as adversaries. At cotton processing facilities throughout Texas, including documented sites in Taylor, Caldwell, and Waller counties, prisoners witnessed production rates that far exceeded European capabilities. The Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, which utilized POW labor from August 1943 through December 1945, could process in a single day more cotton than a typical German textile mill managed in an entire month. Nevertheless, workers were given regular breaks, full lunches, and were even allowed to listen to radios while on the job. This approach demonstrated that productivity could be achieved through fair treatment rather than the coercion common in the Wehrmacht. German prisoners were also struck by the openness of American political discourse. Declassified FBI surveillance reports from the 1970s note that POWs were astonished to hear farmers openly criticize President Roosevelt and federal policies without fear of reprisal. One specific incident near Bryan, Texas, recorded a farmer telling a Department of Agriculture inspector to go to hell during a dispute over crop allocations, facing no legal consequences, a level of defiance that would have been fatal under Nazi rule. Contemporary local newspapers frequently reported on POW engagement with civilians. Publications such as the Hearn Democrat, Bryan Daily Eagle, and Temple Daily Telegram documented prisoner work assignments and social interactions. Reports from December 1943 described German POWs participating in supervised Christmas shopping excursions, offering them a glimpse of American youth culture. Teenagers congregated at drugstore soda fountains, socializing freely across genders, dancing to swing and jazz music deemed degenerate by Nazi ideology, and wearing stylish clothing despite wartime restrictions. The behavior of American women was another source of surprise for the prisoners. Women operated trucks at the Hearn Cotton Oil Mill, ran Main Street businesses, and supervised male workers in defense-related industries. At the nearby Bryan Air Army Field, part of the Women Air Force Service Pilots (WASPs) program, female pilots flew military aircraft. Records confirm WASPs were active at Bryanfield from 1943 to 1944, visible to POW laborers in surrounding areas. Religious institutions in Robertson County also welcomed German POWs. Church records from the First Baptist Church of Hearne, First Methodist Church, and St. Mary's Catholic Church show that prisoners regularly attended services. The Hearne Democrat reported on December 24, 1943, that German POWs participated in Christmas Eve worship alongside congregants whose sons were serving overseas, with no incidents occurring. Overall, the experiences of German prisoners in Texas between 1943 and 1945 reveal not only the reliance on POW labor to meet wartime economic demands, but also the profound cultural and social contrasts between life in the United States and Nazi Germany. Mechanized agriculture, inclusive labor practices, political freedom, youth culture, women's expanded societal roles, and religious participation all presented a stark and often bewildering alternative to the strict hierarchies and authoritarian norms familiar to the prisoners. By the beginning of 1944, Camp Hearne had become the site of highly organized educational initiatives orchestrated by the Special Projects Division of the Provost Marshal General's Office. Once classified records from Record Group 389 provide a detailed account of this extensive re-education effort, although prisoners themselves experienced it merely as optional educational opportunities. Initially, the camp library contained roughly 500 volumes, generously donated by local residents of Hearne. But by August 1944, the collection had expanded to more than 5,000 titles. The American Library Association contributed to this program by supplying books specifically for prisoners, including works by German authors banned under Nazi rule. Prisoners could access Thomas Mann's The Magic Mountain, Erich Maria Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front, and literature by Jewish writers such as Lion Feuchtwanger. For a German soldier, possession of these texts in Nazi Germany could have resulted in severe punishment or even death. Educational opportunities extended beyond reading. Sam Houston State Teachers College, now Sam Houston State University, offered correspondence courses to the prisoners. College archives indicate that between 1944 and 1945, 340 German POWs enrolled in classes ranging from English language and American history to mathematics and agricultural science. Faculty from the college regularly visited Camp Hearne each month to deliver lectures and administer exams. Clarification is needed regarding the camp's newspaper activities. While the publication Der Ruf was produced at Fort Kearny, Rhode Island, Camp Hearne maintained its own periodical called Der Spiegel, or The Mirror. This should not be mistaken for the later German news magazine of the same name. Surviving issues, now held at the Army Heritage and Education Center, reveal a remarkable evolution. Early 1943 editions reflected Nazi propaganda, whereas by late 1944, discussions within the newspaper had shifted to democratic ideas. Declassified Special Projects Division documents show that the educational program was part of a broader psychological strategy. Prisoners were categorized into three main groups: anti-Nazis, around 10%, non-political soldiers, approximately 75%, and devoted Nazis, roughly 15%. Each category received tailored treatment aimed at fostering ideological change. Anti-Nazi prisoners, identified through careful screening of letters, conversations, and reading habits, were granted additional privileges and educational responsibilities. Many became barracks leaders, discussion moderators, and editors for Der Spiegel, playing a pivotal role in influencing non-political prisoners under close supervision. The identification process, developed by Army psychologists with guidance from German émigrés, involved subtle assessments such as reactions to news of German military losses, library choices, participation in courses, and social interactions. Progress was meticulously recorded in weekly reports tracking ideological shifts across the camp. In a November 1944 report, Assistant Executive Officer Major Maxwell McKnight, whose papers are archived at the Hoover Institution, noted that the rate of ideological transformation exceeded expectations. He observed that roughly 60% of non-political prisoners exhibited measurable shifts toward democratic beliefs after 6 months of structured exposure to American society and targeted instruction. Prisoners' assignments in American facilities were a striking aspect of this program. Exposure to the abundance of U.S. workplaces often produced a strong psychological impact. At the Alcoa aluminum plant in Rockdale, Texas, POWs handled scrap metal in quantities that surpassed what German aircraft factories could produce in a week. These assignments gave prisoners direct experience with the sheer scale of American industrial waste. Food processing facilities were particularly revealing. At the Stokely Brothers Cannery in Cameron, Texas, which historical records confirm employed POWs from Camp Hearn, workers discarded perfectly edible fruits and vegetables for minor cosmetic imperfections, such as slightly underripe tomatoes, misshapen corn, or blemished beans. For German prisoners who were familiar with scarcity back home, this level of waste was astonishing. In a letter preserved in Red Cross archives, PFC Friedrich Müller wrote, "Today we destroyed hundreds of pounds of fruit because it did not meet canning standards. Fruit that would be a treasure in Germany is treated as garbage here." The American supervisor apologized to us, not realizing he was apologizing for abundance beyond our imagination. Through these carefully structured educational and work programs, Camp Hearn implemented one of the most comprehensive re-education efforts of World War II, combining ideological, intellectual, and experiential methods to influence prisoners' beliefs and perceptions. The Christmas season of 1943 at Camp Hearn is thoroughly chronicled through a variety of sources, including local newspaper coverage, Red Cross documentation, and official military records. In this small Texas town of roughly 2,000 inhabitants, the entire community came together to ensure that German prisoners of war experienced a holiday that reflected dignity and generosity, an effort that sharply contradicted conventional wartime expectations. On December 23, 1943, the Hearn Democrat printed an extensive record of local contributions. Churches throughout the town organized the collection of nearly 4,800 individual gift parcels, while school children prepared handcrafted cards and festive decorations. The American Legion Post 164, composed of veterans who had previously faced German soldiers in World War I, donated items such as cigarettes, sweets, and sporting equipment to the very individuals they had once considered adversaries. Musical instruments were provided by the Lions Club, and the Garden Club adorned the camp grounds with holly and evergreen branches. The camp's Christmas tree, prominently featured in local media photographs, towered at 30 feet in the central compound, illuminated continuously with electric lights. Records maintained by the quartermaster highlight the extraordinary scale of the decorations. Electricity consumption during the holiday season at Camp Hearn surpassed that available to many German villages for all purposes, a level of display unimaginable even under peacetime conditions in Europe. Local congregations performed Christmas concerts in German for the prisoners. Notably, the choir of the First Methodist Church learned traditional German carols phonetically under the direction of Mrs. Sarah Patterson, whose own son was then engaged in combat in Italy. The juxtaposition of American mothers singing to enemy soldiers while their children fought in Europe elicited profound emotional reactions among some prisoners. The Christmas feast itself, as recorded in quartermaster menus and guard reports, was lavish for wartime standards. Each prisoner received a pound of roast turkey, accompanied by ham, candied sweet potatoes, green beans, cranberry sauce, mince pie, apple pie, ice cream, beer for enlisted personnel, and California wine for officers, a meal totaling roughly 5,000 calories per individual. By contrast, typical civilian rations in Germany, when accessible, rarely exceeded 1,200 calories per day. Beyond the generosity of holiday celebrations, the environment at Camp Hearn exposed German prisoners to racial dynamics uncommon in both Nazi Germany and the United States. African American soldiers from the 359th Infantry Regiment occasionally served as guards, placing prisoners, products of Nazi racial ideology, under the authority of Black Americans. Some prisoners requested reassignment rather than serve under African American supervision. These requests were denied by camp officials. In a December 1943 report, Lieutenant Colonel Stiles observed that objections to African American guards were formally recorded but ignored. Simultaneously, prisoners witnessed the contradictions of segregation firsthand. They could dine in restaurants that denied entry to their guards, or attend movie theaters where the guards were restricted from main seating areas. In certain social settings, German captives experienced greater freedoms than some American citizens, highlighting stark and ironic disparities. Work assignments at the camp further revealed the practical implications of racial prejudice and its fallacies. German prisoners labored alongside Mexican American and African American workers in agricultural settings, often performing less efficiently than their mixed-race co-workers. These observations directly challenged Nazi claims about racial superiority and productivity, particularly during tasks like cotton picking, where Black laborers consistently outperformed the German prisoners. Individual accounts provide compelling evidence of ideological transformation. Hermann Bircher, who arrived at Camp Hearn in June 1943 as a committed Nazi, later recounted in his memoir how his beliefs gradually eroded through day-to-day experiences. He specifically cited Christmas 1943 as a turning point, noting how the generosity of Hearn's residents, people whose sons had been targets of German attacks, demonstrated a strength and moral confidence far beyond mere pity. For Bircher, the gesture revealed a vision of victory that extended beyond military success to a broader moral and cultural triumph, signaling a peace that had already begun to take shape even amidst war. In sum, Camp Hearn in December 1943 represents a remarkable intersection of humanity, social contradiction, and ideological disruption. Through acts of communal generosity, musical performances, and integrated labor, the town created conditions that unsettled entrenched beliefs on both sides of the conflict, offering prisoners not only comfort but also profound insights into the complexities of American society. After relocating to the United States in 1953, he obtained citizenship 5 years later in 1958 and pursued a career as an engineer at General Motors until he retired. Georg Gardner, on the other hand, had fled from Camp Demmin, New Mexico in September 1945, living under the assumed identity of Dennis Wiles for 4 decades. Instead of leaving the country, he chose to remain in the U.S. without legal status, marrying an American woman, raising a family, and working as a tennis coach in California. When he eventually turned himself in for a television documentary in 1985, he had spent more of his life in America than in Germany. His experiences, chronicled in his autobiography, Hitler's Last Soldier in America, illustrate the profound influence of American society on individuals. Similarly, Reinhold Pell escaped from Camp Washington, Illinois in 1945, not due to harsh treatment, but motivated by curiosity and a desire to experience life in America. According to his memoir, Enemies Are Human, he lived without legal status in Chicago for 7 years, supporting himself through work in bookstores and marrying an American woman before voluntarily surrendering to authorities in 1953. An FBI investigation concluded that he had violated no laws other than entering the country illegally. Pell received U.S. citizenship in 1959 and went on to establish a thriving business, eventually helping other German immigrants to settle in the United States. While the experiences of German prisoners of war, POWs, varied across the more than 500 American camps, certain patterns emerged. Camp Alva, Oklahoma, focused on agricultural education. Records from the U.S. Department of Agriculture indicate that German POWs managed a 200-acre model farm implementing American techniques such as mechanical cultivation, crop rotation, soil conservation, and hybrid seed development. These practical skills proved essential when prisoners returned to a war-ravaged Germany. The program's success also attracted local farmers who hired POW work teams at higher wages, introducing competition for available labor. In Kansas, Camp Concordia became notable for its arts program. POWs produced murals that remain preserved in Stone County Courthouse and several other local buildings. The camp's orchestra, outfitted with instruments donated by Kansas communities, gave public performances that received positive reviews in the Concordia Blade, with critics praising the professional skill of the musicians. Artistic contributions by prisoners eventually became part of permanent collections in Kansas museums. Camp Trinidad, Colorado, presented distinctive challenges due to extreme winter temperatures reaching -20 degrees F. Quartermaster documents show that the U.S. Army provided prisoners with Arctic-grade clothing, heated barracks, and increased rations up to 4,000 calories per day during the winter months. Swiss inspector André Poncho observed in February 1944 that the German POWs at Trinidad received winter provisions superior to those of Wehrmacht soldiers on the Eastern Front, according to the prisoners themselves. Perhaps most striking to German soldiers was the transparency of information in the United States. POWs had access to newspapers that openly critiqued the war effort, discussed production difficulties, and highlighted strategic failures. The Special Projects Division deliberately made diverse news sources available, understanding that exposure to an uncensored press would undermine totalitarian indoctrination. Radios and recreation halls broadcast programs featuring political commentary and satirical performances by entertainers such as Bob Hope, who lampooned military and political leaders. Journalists, including Edward R. Murrow, challenged military strategies, and congressional debates over wartime appropriations, including dissenting opinions, were publicly accessible. To the German military mind, observing the 1944 election from inside a POW camp, with Roosevelt facing a serious challenge from Thomas Dewey, Republicans criticizing wartime policies, and newspapers publishing opposition viewpoints, appeared almost incomprehensible. Yet the American war effort continued, and in many ways was strengthened by this openness, offering a practical demonstration of democratic resilience under conditions of disagreement, which directly challenged authoritarian assumptions. Reports from the International Red Cross, preserved in Geneva, consistently rated American POW camps above the minimum standards established by the Geneva Conventions. These impartial inspections provide crucial verification of the conditions in which prisoners lived. Inspector Guy Metro, in his comprehensive August 1944 report, noted that U.S. camps exceeded treaty requirements in all categories. Food rations matched or surpassed those provided to American soldiers, medical care equaled military hospital standards, and educational and recreational facilities often exceeded those offered to U.S. troops. At Camp Hearn, for instance, prisoners received between 3,300 and 3,800 calories per day, exceeding the Geneva-mandated 2,000. Each prisoner had roughly 40 square feet of living space, compared with the convention's requirement of 27, and medical staffing included one physician per 500 prisoners instead of the mandated one per 1,000. Prisoner of war camps in the United States were designed with a comprehensive approach to daily life, incorporating structured recreational activities, organized sports leagues, library access, and educational programs. The overarching philosophy emphasized that detainees should be provided meaningful occupation and personal development opportunities, not merely confined. According to Inspector Emil Sandstrom, American camps were exceptional when compared to facilities in other countries. After conducting inspections of camps in Canada, Britain, and Australia, he concluded that the conditions in the United States were superior in both material quality and underlying philosophy. Unlike other nations, the U.S. treated prisoners as temporarily displaced individuals rather than adversaries to be punished. Prisoners assigned to work in American industries experienced production methods that significantly reshaped their understanding of efficiency and labor organization. At the Lonier Steel Plant in Dangerfield, Texas, for example, German prisoners from Camp Hearn were employed between 1944 and 1945. During this period, monthly steel production at the plant exceeded what the entire Ruhr Valley had produced in a year before Allied bombing campaigns. The remarkable output was driven not solely by advanced machinery, but by the motivation and engagement of the workforce. Company records show that workers competed for productivity bonuses, proposed efficiency improvements, and took pride in their accomplishments. Production metrics were prominently displayed in charts, allowing each shift to compare achievements like scores in a sporting event. Employees wore company insignia, invested in war bonds using overtime pay, and even painted names on bombers being manufactured, fostering a sense of personal investment in the war effort. Morale and recognition proved more influential than direct supervision. In the rail sector, prisoner labor also contributed to highly efficient logistical operations. At the Smithville Yard of the Missouri-Kansas-Texas Railroad, prisoners observed the precision and scale of American coordination. Trains arrived on schedule, loading and unloading equipment operated continuously, and telegraph and telephone networks ensured seamless communication across the country. These accomplishments were not the result of centralized planning committees, but rather the natural organization of a capitalist system mobilized for wartime production. As the European conflict drew to a close in the spring of 1945, U.S. authorities began extensive preparations to repatriate prisoners to a homeland devastated by war. This preparation went far beyond mere return to home soil. While the War Department launched Project Paperclip to recruit German scientists, it also implemented broader educational initiatives for prisoners. Vocational training, courses in civil administration, and programs in agriculture, public health, and infrastructure reconstruction were introduced to equip former detainees with practical skills to rebuild Germany. Special attention was given to identifying individuals with potential for democratic leadership, providing them with additional instruction in governance and administration. Records from the Provost Marshal General reveal the scale of these efforts. By May 1945, 31,000 prisoners were enrolled in vocational training, 18,000 were studying English, 12,000 participated in agricultural courses, 8,500 took technical classes, and 6,200 engaged in business administration programs. Even before the public rollout of the Marshall Plan, American officials explained the principles of Reconstruction to the prisoners. Representatives from the State Department visited camps to communicate that the United States intended to restore, not punish, Germany. Such generosity from a victorious nation profoundly undermined the remnants of Nazi ideology, including beliefs in racial superiority and the survival of the fittest mentality. The outcomes of this comprehensive program are reflected in the behavior of the prisoners themselves. Out of 425,000 German prisoners held in the United States, only 2,222 attempted to escape, a mere 0.52%. Of these, only 54 managed to evade capture for more than 30 days, representing a fraction of 0.01%. These figures illustrate not only the efficacy of American camp management, but also the transformative impact of education, work engagement, and humane treatment on individuals who had been steeped in totalitarian ideology. During their detention in the United States, German prisoners of war exhibited minimal active resistance. Only 7 confirmed acts of sabotage were reported, representing a mere 0.001% of the camp population. Incidents of work refusal were slightly higher, but still rare, with 178 documented cases, amounting to approximately 0.04%. Despite these occasional acts, voluntary engagement in labor programs was extensive, with 87% of those eligible choosing to participate. Post-war assessments conducted by American occupation officials reveal that returning prisoners generally held favorable views toward the United States. Approximately 74% expressed positive opinions regarding American democracy. When the Marshall Plan was announced, 61% supported the economic assistance, and more than half, 55%, endorsed a future alliance between Germany and the United States. A notable portion, 38%, considered relocating to the U.S., while 23% maintained personal correspondence with American families they had come to know during their captivity. Immigration records indicate that roughly 5,000 former prisoners legally moved to the United States throughout the 1950s. Of these, naturalization documents show that 92% attained citizenship within the designated time frame. Measures of post-immigration success, including employment stability, home ownership, and low criminal involvement, suggest that these former prisoners often fared better than other immigrant groups. The impact of repatriated prisoners on the reconstruction of West Germany is well documented in both U.S. occupation files and German governmental archives. Many former prisoners assumed influential roles in the new democratic framework. 48 became members of the Bundestag, 312 served as mayors or local council members, 1,847 contributed to agricultural modernization initiatives, 2,341 joined the teaching workforce in restored schools, and 4,165 managed businesses, frequently applying practices learned in the United States. Hans-Georg von Studnitz, who had been a prisoner and later became a prominent industrialist in Germany, reflected in 1965 on his experiences. Our time in America provided more than memories. It gave us practical insight into democratic governance, market economies, and cooperative societies. We had witnessed the future and knew it was achievable. Camp Hearn, where many of these prisoners had been held, officially closed in December 1945. Nonetheless, bonds formed during captivity endured for decades. The Hearn Heritage League preserves extensive correspondence from former prisoners spanning 40 years. Annual Christmas greetings continued until the death of the last known former prisoner in 2001, offering a unique record of lasting personal and cultural transformation rather than temporary influence. In 1984, commemorating the 40th anniversary of D-Day, 50 former Camp Hearn prisoners returned to Texas. The reunion received extensive coverage in the Hearn Democrat, highlighting a profound reconciliation. Former guards were warmly welcomed by ex-prisoners, and even Wehrmacht veterans participated in commemorative ceremonies, laying flowers at the American Legion Memorial. Fritz Zimmermann, representing the group, remarked, "We arrived as adversaries, committed to notions of racial hierarchy and national destiny. We left as allies and friends, recognizing that the apparent disorder of democracy is its real strength, and that diversity fosters unity rather than undermining it." Scholarly research extensively supports the transformative effect of captivity on German prisoners. Arnold Kramer's Nazi Prisoners of War in America, 1979, offers a comprehensive account of the prisoners' experiences, while Judith Gansberg's Stalag USA, 1977, analyzes the structured re-education programs implemented in camps. Antonio Thompson's Men in German Uniform, 2010, investigates labor programs, and Ron Robbins' The Barbed Wire College, 1995, explores the educational dimensions of these initiatives. Collectively, these studies, grounded in archival material, interviews, and government documentation, demonstrate the breadth and effectiveness of the transformation experienced by German POWs in the United States. Historical analysis suggests that the approach taken by the United States towards German prisoners of war, POWs, during and immediately after World War II represents one of the most effective examples of ideological re-education achieved through experience rather than through direct indoctrination. German soldiers who arrived in American custody between 1943 and 1946 were confronted by a reality that often contradicted the worldview they had carried into the war. Every ordinary freedom, every minor act of decency, and every unexpected gesture of kindness accumulated gradually, undermining preconceived notions and fostering profound shifts in thought. These POWs anticipated encountering a defeated, fractured society. Instead, they encountered a nation resilient and self-assured enough to show mercy to its former enemies. Transformation did not occur through speeches, pamphlets, or propaganda. It emerged through lived experience. The Germans observed democracy in action not as a polished system, but as a dynamic, sometimes chaotic process that nevertheless functioned effectively. They saw progress toward racial equality unfolding despite the persistence of segregation. They witnessed women exercising authority and making decisions in public life while retaining societal notions of femininity. They watched former adversaries interact with respect and, in many cases, develop genuine bonds of trust and friendship. These encounters, seemingly mundane to Americans, were extraordinary revelations for individuals conditioned under totalitarian rule. Military defeat alone had not achieved this level of cognitive and moral recalibration, yet exposure to American daily life catalyzed deep ideological change. The POWs' experiences went beyond observing American military strength. They engaged with the nation's core principles. They did not merely watch democracy in operation, they were participants in it, given responsibilities, freedoms, and opportunities to exercise judgment. In this sense, some of the United States' most lasting successes emerged not on the battlefield, but within the confines of its prison camps, where former enemies were transformed into advocates through the simple act of witnessing a different way of life. What struck the German POWs as remarkable was ordinary to Americans. To eyes accustomed to tyranny, the freedom, imperfection, and unpredictability of American society appeared almost miraculous. German prisoners entered expecting confrontation and hostility. They instead discovered reflections of what they might aspire to become. These moments of revelation reshaped individual lives and collectively influenced broader geopolitical developments. They laid the groundwork for post-war cooperation, including the establishment of the Atlantic Alliance, the implementation of the Marshall Plan, and the democratic reconstruction of Western Europe. The German POW's transformation underscores a fundamental lesson of history. Sometimes the most enduring victories are achieved not by imposing destruction or propaganda, but by demonstrating principles through lived reality. Acts of humanity and openness, however ordinary they may seem, can have consequences that outlast armies and treaties. The seemingly small but profound encounters these prisoners experienced in America became a foundation for one of the 20th century's most successful transitions from enemy to ally.